have liftoff.
NASA has two spacecraft that were born 50 years apart, but they look like they were separated at birth. I'm talking, of course, about the historic Apollo Command Module and NASA's new Orion spacecraft. Both share the same shape, but there's similarities end there. Hey everyone, TJ here for I Need More Space. In each episode of this series, I'm going to take two components of spaceflight and compare them to one another. Hopefully we both learn how they came to be and get a better understanding of the story of space's past and future. And this video is sponsored by me. Yes, me. I do this all my own dime in my own time. I appreciate you watching, and if you'd like to support me making more episodes, consider buying a shirt, ineedmore.space/shop, or just subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. All right, back to the episode. 2020 looks like it's going to be a really exciting year for spaceflight fans everywhere. Boeing's Starliner and SpaceX's Dragon are scheduled to make their first crewed flights, getting NASA back in the astronaut taxi business for the first time since the space shuttle retired back in 2011. But lost in the exciting buzz of these upcoming launches is an equally important and very exciting mission, Artemis 1, the first integrated test of NASA's massive Space Launch System, or SLS rocket, and its next generation Orion spacecraft. But with Orion's cone-shaped structure, it definitely looks more like something from spaceflight's past rather than the new ship to take us to spaceflight's future. So, is Orion just a clone of Apollo's command module, or are the similarities only skin deep? Let's jump in. So, some background on the Apollo command module. When President John F. Kennedy declared that America should go to the moon by the end of the 1960s, he drew the finish line for the still young space race. While the Soviet Union was in the lead at the time, spaceflight experts in the States thought that a lunar landing was far enough out of the Soviets' reach that NASA had a chance to overtake the Soviets and beat them to it. The result was the Apollo program. Apollo had the single goal of getting American astronauts to the moon as quickly as possible and returning them safely to Earth. Built upon the lessons of the Mercury and Gemini programs, Apollo consisted of the massive three-stage Saturn V rocket, the gumdrop-shaped command module, its cylindrical service module, and the spidery lunar lander. Because the command module was the only part of Apollo that would make it back to Earth, it needed to be the workhorse of the entire mission, responsible for transporting a crew of 3 astronauts and keeping them alive from liftoff to splashdown. And it did this spectacularly well. 11 Apollo missions were flown, with 6 successful lunar landings. After the final flight of Apollo 17 in 1972, command modules also flew 3 missions to America's first space station, Skylab, in the 70s.
Recovery, Skylab. On the main, everything's okay.
As well as 1 mission to dock in low Earth orbit with the Soviets. While the Apollo command module was incredibly successful, it was a single-use craft. With the space race essentially won, NASA's budget was shrinking, and the reusable space shuttle was on the horizon.
All engines building up thrust.
The final flight of the classic Apollo-era spacecraft took place in 1975 as the American half of the Apollo-Soyuz test project. But the space shuttle wasn't a true replacement for Apollo. While it was much larger and could fly dozens of missions, it wasn't capable of leaving Earth orbit, and its thermal tiles couldn't withstand the much hotter re-entry temperature from a high-speed return from the moon. With the end of Apollo, NASA lost the ability to conduct crewed deep space missions, until Orion. While the Apollo command module is part of a massive effort with a single goal in mind, Orion's path to space is a little bit more complicated. First announced as a crew exploration vehicle back in the 2000s, Orion was originally part of NASA's Constellation program, supposed to take America back to the moon and on to Mars. Constellation consisted of 2 rockets named Ares, the smaller Ares 1 that would carry Orion,
Liftoff of Ares 1X.
and the large Ares 5 to carry heavier cargo like a jumbo Altair lunar lander. But after going over budget and falling behind schedule, Constellation was canceled in 2010, and only Orion survived the chopping block. The Ares rockets were recycled into basically the Space Launch System, a single rocket for launching Orion and cargo into orbit. But the Altair lander was scrapped outright, because returning to the moon's surface was no longer a goal. Instead, Orion would carry astronauts to rendezvous with a small asteroid in lunar orbit as a preparation for a trip to Mars. But as often happens with new administrations, those goals changed. In 2019, the asteroid meetup was canceled, and a mission to Mars was put in the background. Instead, NASA was asked to return astronauts to the moon no later than 2024 as part of the new Artemis program. Despite the shifting goals, Orion had its first successful uncrewed flight in 2012 when it completed 2 orbits before splashing down in the Pacific Ocean. And as said in the beginning, Artemis 1, Orion's second uncrewed flight, will take it to the moon and back sometime in 2020. Throughout all of its mission changes, Orion has stayed pretty much the same. And in fact, it doesn't look like Orion's design has changed much since the days of Apollo. To understand the reasons behind its retro appearance, it helps to look back at the decisions that have shaped Apollo. The design of Apollo's command module closely followed the Mercury and Gemini capsules that came before it. But unlike Mercury and Gemini, the Apollo command module was designed to carry a crew of 3 for up to 2 weeks and had to be much bigger than its predecessors. Its 210 cubic feet of living space was about the same size as a walk-in closet, which in microgravity was just enough room for a crew to live and work side by side. Since it would carry the crew from launch to landing, the command module was packed with nearly everything the crew needed for a trip to the moon and back. Crammed tightly inside were the life support systems, flight and navigation controls, computers, food, and waste management system. But as functional as it was, it couldn't get astronauts to the moon and back on its own. Attached to the command module was a cylindrical service module. If you think of the command module as the brains of the Apollo spacecraft, then the service module was the heart and lungs. Along with providing oxygen for the crew, the service module generates power for the command module by using fuel cells, which combine hydrogen and oxygen to create electricity. This chemical reaction also had the added bonus of producing drinking water for the crew during the mission. However, using fuel cells also puts a limit on the amount of electricity the craft could generate during the mission. The Apollo command module also required at least 1 crew member to pilot and run the spacecraft at all times, or it would need to be shut down like what happened during the Apollo 13 mission. Most of the service module was taken up by its propulsion system, the large rocket engine that slowed the ship down to enter lunar orbit and gave it the kick it needed to head back to Earth. The service module stayed attached to the command module until just before re-entry, when it was jettisoned to burn up in the atmosphere. Now, re-entry is really when the command module's design becomes important. In the early days of the space program, engineers learned that a gumdrop-like shape, blunt on the bottom and tapered to the top, was the safest and simplest way to slow a spacecraft during re-entry into Earth's atmosphere. An ablative heat shield designed to absorb the intense heat of re-entry slowly burned away, protecting the blunt end and the astronauts inside from temperatures as high as 25,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And also like Mercury and Gemini, the Apollo command module used parachutes to slow its descent before splashing down in the ocean. Landing on water gave a much softer cushion than touching down on solid ground, and provided a lot of extra room in case the capsule happened to wander off course a little. It's this design that engineers returned to when putting Orion together. Orion was the same blunt shape as Apollo's command module to slow its entry into the atmosphere. It uses an upgraded ablative shield to protect its human cargo during re-entry, and a set of parachutes to carry it into the gentle splashdown in the ocean. But shape and landing style aren't all that Orion and Apollo have in common. Like Apollo's command module, Orion doesn't come down with its own rocket engine. It relies on its European Service Module, or the ESM, to make course adjustments and enter and exit lunar orbit, using a recycled Space Shuttle Orbital Maneuvering System engine. The European Service Module also provides Orion with a breathable atmosphere and its electrical power, just like Apollo's Service Module. But for all they have in common, there are also some very important differences. Orion is about 1.5 times larger than Apollo. Its 316 cubic feet of habitable space provides enough room to house 4 astronauts, along with the European Service Module. It's capable of supporting them 1.5 times longer, about 21 days. Now, what's under the skin is what really sets the 2 ships apart. 50 years of advancements in flight hardware, life support, and computer systems mean that instead of gauges, switches, buttons, and dials on nearly every surface of Orion, now most of its functions can be controlled by a few touchscreens and manual consoles. Orion can also operate autonomously with limited support from mission control, so the entire crew could leave the capsule itself for months at a time. Progression of these miniaturized systems leaves more room for things like food, sleeping areas, and a state-of-the-art space toilet. All nice things to have when you're headed to the moon or Mars. Also, Orion's service module uses solar panels and batteries instead of fuel cells to generate electricity. Also, with an indefinite supply of energy, the carbon dioxide scrubbers on board Orion use the amine swing bed payload system, which efficiently recycles Orion's breathable air and provide almost unlimited oxygen to the crew. Instead of relying on a single engine, the European service module will also have 8 small backup rocket motors that can take over in an emergency. During Apollo 13, the lunar module's descent engine performed the same task, although it wasn't designed with that in mind. On top of it all, Orion will be reusable, enabling a smaller fleet of spacecraft to conduct several different missions. To put it all together, Orion relies on proven and reliable ideas from the Apollo program and improves on them with lessons and hardware developed from the Space Shuttle, the International Space Station, and 50 years of spaceflight. While it might look like a retro throwback to the early days of space exploration, Orion packs enough advancements under the hood to make it a major upgrade, capable of taking us back to the moon or even further. The final point I'd like to cover in this video is the elephant in the room: cost. The cost of a seat on the Apollo command module would come to $126,966,134.81 in today's dollars, whereas Orion would come to $191,666,666.67, assuming 4 astronauts. That is a 50% increase in cost, but you have more astronauts, more capability, and possibly more sustainable infrastructure. So after hearing all these arguments, which capsule would you prefer to fly on? Leave your vote in the poll above. If you have any of your own opinions on how the Apollo capsule and Orion capsule stack up, I hope you'll drop them in the comment section below. For more videos about all cool stuff that people do in space, please subscribe to this channel. And please come find me on social media. I'm at TJ_Cooney on Twitter. I post daily videos and photos about spaceflight and random things I just find neat. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye.